Okay. Thank you so much for taking the time for, setting aside 40 minutes to come to this interview. I really appreciate your
My
participation,
pleasure.
your stories. So for, all of our sakes, for the listeners and for me, could you briefly introduce yourself, your background, your academic background, your professional path, and what you see doing going forward?
Yep, of course. So I started my legal career in Turkey.
Mhm.
I studied law initially in the University of Istanbul.
Mhm.
That's a four-year path, and Turkey's a civil law country, so it's a very rigorous system.
Mhm.
And it's not just the notion of law that you learn, but you also learn about rules and regulations and main laws, like
Mhm.
acts that form the basis of the system.
Mhm.
Um, so I did that, and then I started working at Clifford Chance in
Mhm.
Istanbul. Clifford Chance is a global law firm.
Mhm.
They originate from London, UK.
Mhm.
So they're mainly practicing English law, but they also have offices across the globe, and they practice both local law and English law
Mhm.
in other jurisdictions. Um, so that office was doing M&A, banking finance, and some capital markets work. So it was actually quite a specialized track, especially for Turkey, because I suppose in Turkey, the legal profession is mostly viewed as a generalist profession rather than a specialist. And I suppose once you say that you're a lawyer, everyone expects you to sort of be able to do anything and everything, divorce them and solve their rent issues, also get them out of prison. But the more, I guess, nuanced parts of the profession is not that well known. How I ended up there is it's it's not that clear. I suppose it wasn't a very well-informed decision at the time. I went into wait, this is now going into bits and pieces and details, but to just give a broad overview, I worked at Clifford Chance for 4 years, applied for an LLM in the US, went to Harvard to do my LLM, and then I started working at Skadden in London as a US attorney. So I practice US law, mostly New York and Delaware. And I still do the same type of work. So it's mostly corporate and commercial, specializing in M&A and capital markets.
I mean, you've said let's not do the bits and pieces, but to get into those bits and pieces and details, as you looked at those different steps throughout your career up to now, why take that first step into law in Turkey? Why then take the step into the UK? Why take the step to the LLM? Could you just walk us through briefly what drew you to each of those steps?
Yep, sure. I suppose, unlike many people, I have no lawyers in my family. I
Hmm.
do have a lot of lawyers amongst my parents' friends, so it's always been around me.
Hmm.
Um, but I didn't initially consider it, I suppose, based on their work, but
Hmm.
I was very much into international relations and how states interact, foreign policy. Um, and I suppose through our more idealistic teenage years, I was very much into how policy, politics, and law interacted.
Hmm.
And that's how I first considered studying law. So it goes back to when I was still in elementary school, I guess. But that's how I got the idea. And I thought the best place to do that would be Turkey because again, because I was considering a more public law route. I wanted to be in Turkey. I wanted to either represent Turkey or be a part of the foreign work that goes in Turkey. So rather than studying abroad and then try to transfer into Turkey, which is I suppose in the legal profession, it's more difficult to change jurisdictions because you have to learn some stuff from scratch, especially if it's not the US or the UK that you come from, where you can still practice the law of your country in different jurisdictions. You're sort of tied to that place. So that's how I decided to stay in Turkey. Um, and again, going into law school, I still had those more international relations, foreign policy work in mind. Um, in Istanbul University, we go through a very, very rigorous legal education. Again, as I said, it's not just the legal notion that you get, but you really go into the details and specifics. And that opened up a whole new chapter for me, introduced me to, I guess, the specificities of the fields of law that I was unaware of, the details and complexities. And I was very, I suppose, mesmerized to an extent to what I learned there and how how detailed and structured the law is. And I wanted to see more of that. And that's how I started doing internships in Turkey with law firms that practice commercial law. Again, I think, more so interested in the dispute resolution aspect of it going through law school, but I'm not sure if that's because I was more interested in dispute resolution or if that was because that was more known to me. So I was drawn to that, but I was yet to explore what it meant to be working on deals and transactions and explore the economics of those transactions, etc. And those internships that I did throughout law school brought me a lot of perspective into the profession. Um, and I went on this M&A journey from then on. Um, and those 4 years of practice in Turkey, um, I suppose big law is very tiring everywhere. It's a lot of hours, a lot of work, but that does come with its benefits as well. The learning curve is immense, and especially in a boutique law firm or in a jurisdiction where there are only a handful of people who really know what they're doing. You get to see a lot, and you get to see the more senior work as junior associate as well. Um, and seeing all that, I decided that it would be very helpful for me to have some sort of a common law background as well. Um, Not going into the details of civil common um, bits, but common law and civil law have very different academics, different sources of law, and a very different approach to the practice as well. Um, And all of the deals that we did in Turkey, yes, obviously we had Turkish law governed aspects of it, but the very main documents that govern the relationship between parties, that govern the sale of an asset or govern um, the loan of funds, um, or even in bigger project financing deals, how these massive infrastructures are built. Most of them are in Turkey governed by English law. And I suppose in the Americas, that's US and mainly New York law. So with that in mind, I decided that I should either go to the UK or the US for an LLM to make up for that, to see the difference. And I went to an American school in Istanbul in high school, what used to be an American school back in the day. So I suppose I had more interest, or the US education system was a bit more known to me. So my main focus was on US Ivy League schools. Um, and out of pure sheer luck, I somehow got into Harvard. Um, and yeah, so I started exploring that part.
So, I mean, looking specifically across your journey to the academic context, right? So you had an American experience before in high school, then you went to university in Turkey, and then you got into another US academic context. Were there any cultural, institutional, linguistic differences that stood out to you? Did you feel the transition was seamless? Were there any challenges that you experienced?
I think if I had gone straight out of law school, it would have been a bit more difficult to adjust how I saw things. Because in Turkey, again, our law school education is very extremely academic and extremely technical.
Mhm.
Um, and I suppose to an extent, it's out of touch with the practice aspect um, of the profession, which is odd because yes, there's obviously an immense theoretical aspect to it, but it's also legal profession is so embedded in the daily life, in the culture, and in economy
Mhm.
that it's interesting to see how separation of those topics ends up affecting the new legal professionals. But I think going into practice for a few years before the LLM sort of bridged the gaps for me. I started learning more about economics, especially for my field, and I think generally for any lawyer or any legal professional, it's very important to have a good understanding of economy. If you're doing PIL, public international law, then macroeconomics will be more helpful. If you're doing private law, then microeconomics and how finance works, or even basic accounting. It's very important to understand what you are doing, what the aim is, what your client is doing, or what the project is in general. So I think without those, I would have lacked a certain perspective at Harvard, um, because I suppose this is a general remark for common law education, but it really depends on the court decisions, and that's how law sort of develops, right? So the entire education system is based on discussions rather than, okay, so this is the text, this is the theory behind it, and we discuss the theory. But you actually get to discuss the facts and how they play into making the theory and how real life develops rules. And that just brings a completely different perspective into whatever it is that you're doing because it brings in methodology, deduction skills. Um, so yeah, I think without that working experience in between, it would have been more difficult for me to catch up. And I think this goes for many people who prefer to do an LLM straight out of law school, especially coming from civil law jurisdictions. But other than that, I think language-wise, it wasn't a big struggle. Um, and again, I think in Turkey, we have a very heavy legal jargon.
Mhm.
And nothing really compares to that. Comparatively, I think the language in US law schools is quite simple.
Mhm.
As I mean, as far as English goes. Um, but yeah.
No, I mean, when you have all these tools at your disposal, you've been exposed to English for a very long time. You've been exposed to legal English through your work experience as well. Do you find as though when you get down to working with those skills that your voice changes when you write in Turkish versus in English? I mean, you work in English now, and do you find as though there's an English lawyer version of you and then a Turkish lawyer version of you that's peeking its head out through your education? What's your sort of relationship with those two lawyers?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think initially when I started working in London, I
Hmm.
could still see that because the way I delivered documents or the way I presented things, even though I had the Harvard experience, I was still born, educated, raised, became a lawyer in Turkey. So my go-to is still my Turkish skills to an extent. And the stuff that I drafted would be much heavier, much longer, because otherwise it just seems so simple to me. It's like, no, we have to, it needs to look more legal because it's coming from an attorney. But nobody's really concerned with that. On the contrary, which really makes a lot of sense because we're not really trying to prove to anyone that we're lawyers. We're trying to get a business done.
Hmm.
Um, so it's very important to know what you're doing. Obviously, you know the theory, you know why you're doing something, but the
Hmm.
way that you deliver that needs to be as simple as you can get it to be to your client or to whomever that you're speaking to, unless they're a lawyer. So you need to really make it concise, understandable, and simple, and that's how you get the work done. Um, so I think I still struggle with that sometimes. It's definitely a learning process. But I am at least now very much aware of it. So I have a very critical view on my work and I work on those. And it's the very simple things. I guess in Turkey we use passive voice a lot. Um, Here, if you use passive voice, it's like, no, this is not literature. Just say whatever you have to say directly. So it's just stuff like that. I guess the details are what really makes our work stand out. And yeah.
Yeah, you said something really interesting about not having to, in those writings, prove you're a lawyer. It's not about making it sound lawyery. It's about getting a job done. And I'm wondering, do you think that extends out to the general relationship between legal professionals and one another or their clients or anyone else they're speaking to? In terms of, sure, in your writing you can be simple, but is there in the sort of otherwise communication, you're face to face with the client, you're talking to them? Do you have to prove in an English or English speaking system that you're the lawyer still with the way you hold yourself, the way you talk to them, the way perhaps you relay respect? Or do you think that sort of keep it simple mindset reflects into those relationships as well?
Um, no, I don't think so. I think everyone in the room, if you do your job well, is very much aware that you're a lawyer,
Hmm.
and there's still a lot of respect to the profession.
Hmm.
So people really value the work that comes, especially if they trust a lawyer. Um, but that said, I think that only goes so far as you are able to communicate with your client, and
Hmm.
that means you should know how to speak to them.
Hmm.
Uh, I mean, this is kind of like trying to speak in Turkish to a French person who has no background in it
Hmm.
and expect them to understand what you're saying. So you just need to make sure that they get you clearly so you are able to assist them because then it's not like because I guess when I was in law school as well, I didn't really understand how the process works, but in disputes, most usually what happens is there's an agreement, people do business together, or let's take a bilateral investment treaty. So a company from country A wants to invest in something in country B. They do an agreement together. They start working, building whatever it is they want to do, and then there's a dispute. And then they call up their lawyers and say, hey, we have a problem. What do we do? So this is one aspect of the job. But the transactional side, which I focus on, is your clients come to you and say, we want to create a business, or we want to create more value for our shareholders, etc., and we want to do a deal. So these things have very different approaches because one is in an adverse environment, whereas the other one, you are trying to create something together with other people and you're plugged in from the very beginning. So you actually contribute to how that's structured, how that's formed. And the only way for you to be able to be helpful, I guess, is if you have clear communication with other people, with the bankers or with the business people that you work with. And if they can't understand you, your value won't show because you won't have contributed into anything.
Fair enough. So it seems very goal oriented, and I guess that's what every single job is. You either get the job done or you don't have the job. But
Exactly.
I do sort of want to dig into the comparative of, in your experience, are there any differences in the roles and responsibilities of lawyers and how they practice in Turkey versus in the US or in the UK?
Um, in my area, I wouldn't say so.
Hmm.
Uh, Other than I think in Turkey, lawyers are less so plugged in with the business side,
Hmm.
uh, and they're just given a set of terms of a business deal. Let's
Hmm.
say they turn that into an agreement, and then they focus on the legal side. Whereas here, I feel like I have been much more exposed to the business and the economic side of it as well.
Hmm.
And that actually brings a bit more challenge to the profession because I have no proper like academic education in economics.
Hmm.
Uh, so it's a lot of reading, trying to understand, keeping up with whatever's happening out there. Um, so that's, I guess, another side to the job that you get to do here. But otherwise, you start basically knowing nothing, fresh out of law school for most people. For
Hmm.
LLMs, that's not usually the case because most LLMs do have some sort of experience in their own jurisdictions under their belt, so they are a bit more aware of what's going on,
Hmm.
uh, and at least how a deal is managed and what happens, like the main milestones. So there's a bit more structure to, I think, their day to day in the job that we do.
Hmm.
But otherwise, you know nothing and you start very, it's actually a lot of taking very, very little steps in the first few years.
Hmm.
Uh, you help more senior people in the firm to get a deal done. And or if you're working on disputes, I think it's a lot of research, a lot of helping draft documents, and sometimes it's not so interesting parts of the job, like if you're drafting a petition of hundreds of pages and somebody has to do the footnotes and the references. I think you start there, or in the transactional side, we do something called due diligence, and that's usually for when your client wants to buy a company, they first want to go and do diligence. Um, like what's going on? Are these guys sued all the time? Do they have a lot of liabilities? Do they actually own the properties they say they own? Such and such. And those are usually with the more junior people in the firm. So it's not always, and in Turkey, this is kind of the same. You get to do the same things. And um, so you're more focused on just one deal or one dispute rather than more senior people in the firm who have a lot going on and they have to spend time on all of those. But I suppose across all, you do a lot of work that doesn't seem that impactful in the
Hmm.
beginning. But that's actually very helpful and very important to building a strong foundation
Hmm.
because you get to learn what that document is about and how that's used. Um, and then you start drafting those yourself.
Fair enough. I mean, the general role seems very educational and then field context dependent. I would want to take a step back from that just to ask you one thing, which is, we can have the roles and responsibilities of a lawyer in a particular case, in a particular field, in a particular, context. But when you sort of look at yourself as a lawyer or the profession of lawyers or legal educators at large within society, do you think there's a different perception in Turkey versus in the US?
Towards lawyers, as in how the profession is viewed.
Right. Like, what's their place in society? What ought their place in society be?
Um, I think wherever you go, from Turkey to the US, to the UK, to China, to
Hmm.
Japan, to New Zealand,
Hmm.
uh, saying that you're a lawyer tells the other side that this person has gone through a rigorous education.
Hmm.
They are intelligent, at least to a certain extent, um, and they do something for society.
Hmm.
So I think it's valued and respected across all jurisdictions. Um, but yeah, I think it's valued everywhere.
Hmm.
And every day, it's very interesting times that we're going through, and especially as a lawyer, it's very interesting to see and I mean see this time from a legal perspective because it's very different in times to how someone who's not a lawyer or who is not very much interested in the bigger aspects or the conceptual stuff. So yeah, I think people generally acknowledge that and have a respect.
And you say these are very different times, and it had me wondering, throughout your journey, you've seen the legal educational system practice through your own lens, but situated within different, cross sections of time. Do you think that, the way that law was viewed 20 years ago versus 10 years ago versus 5 years ago versus today has changed the way you see your own sort of conduct within the field, the way that you conduct yourself, in your daily day life or in the way that you see your job as a whole?
Um, so I think, as I said, I had a much more idealistic
Mhm.
perspective choosing this field and my first few years of law school. Uh, so I have definitely changed throughout my practice and become more realistic in a way. I mean, that is to say, we all, obviously, we all have ambitions and we strive mostly to create something that will, I don't know, outlive us, maybe. Um, but there's also the reality that you have to do something on a day-to-day. Um, so apart from being remembered and creating something, you have to get up every morning, go somewhere, spend time with those people, and sometimes very long hours, and then come back home and then repeat for years and years on. And on the side, you also have to create a life, like your personal life. And I don't know if this goes for everyone, but I was more, because I was interested in foreign work, I think that would have had me travel a lot and travel as in um, live in different places for short periods of time for an extended period. This was very exciting to me initially, but I think overall I had a change in view of life, and I thought being in one place would actually help me create more value because the deeper you the more deep you get into a system, you discover more and you learn more and you become an expert there. And that's something very valuable. Um, so yeah, I suppose that goes without saying. There's an ethical aspect to the work that we do as well. Um, and I don't know if everyone has obviously the same ethical values.
So I do want to circle back to one thing that you said, which is, we can talk about the sort of broad strokes of, oh, what's this profession? What does it do? What do we want it to be? But it really is, you go and you spend time with a group of people every single day and you work with them, you work alongside them, or sometimes you work against them. And then you come home and then you do it all over again for days on end. And I wonder, when you're spending time with these people, when you run into challenges, interpersonal, professional, in the nitty-gritty of how you're supposed to conduct yourself in a case, do you think your having a background in Turkey and in the US and in England, in the UK, has given you, particular skills on how you handle those challenges? Do you think it's been helpful in how you handle those challenges, or do you think it's been harmful in how you handle those challenges? How do you sort of think that your bicultural, tricultural, perhaps, perspective impacts your conduct?
Um, I think it's definitely been helpful.
Mhm.
Um, I would say there is no experience that would be harmful to anyone. I mean, it could be harmful to you personally in certain aspects if you've had that experience in a toxic environment, for
Mhm.
instance. But apart from that, having lived through anything and everything will give you a new perspective on life, on people, on how to steer your conversations. And I don't think there's any chance that will be harmful to anyone. The
Mhm.
more people that you meet, the more you have in life.
Mhm.
Um, so I think it's very much been helpful. Um, Again, because this is not my first job, having another professional experience on top of academic experiences also helps shape that difference and bridge the gap because, again, a work setting and a school setting is very different in terms of one, what you're doing, to how you're viewed. Because in academia, I suppose, especially in your first law school, you're there to be educated, and your professors are there to educate you. Obviously, you do have a contribution to the society that you belong in there as well, but it's very clear who gives and who takes. Whereas in a work setting, it's much more convoluted.
Mhm.
Um, I think, from a legal perspective, having backgrounds in both common law and civil law is very helpful,
Mhm.
especially in a private law setting. My my profession still has a lot of internationality to it, and I focus more so on cross-border deals.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of different jurisdictions, different legal systems involved, and you need to bring those together. And sometimes I'm surrounded by only common law practitioners or people coming from common law backgrounds, and I'm the only one who has more civil law experience, and I'm more so able to connect with the details of a civil law jurisdiction that we're doing business in. It's more helpful for me to, I am more helpful to the people around me, the way that I see things and view things, and understand and explain how a civil law jurisdiction might differ to their experience. That's one. And two, again, I suppose more interaction and more experience, whatever this might be, um, brings a difference to how you carry yourself. And I think people really respect people who have a vast experience and who's not afraid to explore. And this is not to say that I wasn't. I was scared of everything every step of the way, but who's not afraid to put themselves out there and experience something different to their comfort zone.
Good. One of the things that you said that was interesting is you don't find yourself as a localized sort of British lawyer, a Turkish lawyer. You're cross-border, and you know, do you find yourself to in that being cross-border, cross-cultural, cross-linguistic in your practice have a different role than you would have if you were entirely localized in a particular context? And by that I mean, yes, you mentioned the sort of civil common law differences, but do you find a particular difference in the professional goals, in the personal goals, in these different areas in which a global lawyer might have a difference from a localized lawyer?
Um, yeah, I guess I've always had an interest in international work.
Hmm.
It was different back in the day. Now it's more so on the business side, but I still am more interested in international players.
Hmm.
Uh, and that was one of the reasons why I chose not to stay in the US after the LLM, because my work experience would have been um, just domestic deals,
Hmm.
or mostly domestic deals. And in London, practicing as a US attorney, I find myself that people from the Middle East and Europe come to us for US legal advice and or also UK English law advice. So it's an amazing bridge of cultures and different jurisdictions. And yeah, I think I strive to be in that field. So internationality, I suppose, still is the goal.
Okay. So, looking at your own path and then looking forward for other people, for other Turkish students who are interested in an LLM or sort of going abroad and having a work experience, then doing a JD, LLM, any of these different things, and perhaps following in your career path. What sort of suggestions would you have? What advice would you give to them? What strategies would you recommend in as they navigate this path forward that, you wish had been recommended to you a few years ago?
A few things. I think English, obviously, your language skills, um, that is the most important thing. There are a lot of more important sides to this, obviously, but without good English.
Mhm.
Okay. Um, so focusing on language skills is very important.
Mhm.
Um, Other than that, networking, that's very important. It's, I guess, a shortcut to trying out everything yourself.
Mhm.
Uh, if you network well and if you meet people from different areas of law, different professions, you get to hear more about their experiences, what they've learned, what they've done. And rather than trying every single one of them yourself, you have an understanding of what's going on out there. Um, Throughout law school, I think it was very helpful for me to do different internships. I think one thing that I wish I knew back then was that my internships would not define my career. And I think, I guess growing up is difficult in the in that sense because you only view life um, to what you've actually lived until then. Um, but you don't really see the 70 years lying ahead. So you think, oh, but if I do X amount of litigation internships as opposed to corporate commercial ones, I will never, ever, ever be able to get a job in corporate commercial work, which is absolute nonsense. Um, so I think it's important to diversify what you do, so that you actually get to figure out what you want to do in the end, rather than going in blind like me. And I mean, lucky me, it turned out to be okay, but I could have hated it as well. Um, so I think diversifying experience is one, good for you to figure out what you want to do, and two, again, um, all fields of law go hand in hand. If you're a corporate lawyer, with no interest or no knowledge of the court decisions out there, you're incomplete. You need to know what your contract will be viewed like if it ever ends up in a court, so you can adjust yourself so you never find your contract in a court. And again, as a litigator, you need to know how contracts are drafted, what goes into those negotiations and discussions, so your case is informed. Um, so having both views is very helpful to be a good lawyer. So I would say, yeah, diversify experience, um, network. Um, Again, as I think I mentioned this before, but I don't think, unless you are on a path to becoming an academic, I think going into an LLM with experience is very important. One, it gives you a completely different perspective into whatever it is you're studying. And again, because the LLMs in the US especially are more practice focused, they're more practical courses, they're more economics related courses, again, that tie into um, law. It's good to have another experience besides your theoretical legal background. Um, so that's one advice that I would have. Um, and keeping an open mind, being well-rounded um, in anything that would affect the profession. Like we're going through a phase of US tariffs, for instance. Um, on the outset, this looks like, oh, well, it's an executive order by the president on another country, um, but it deeply ties into the work that I do. So it's very beneficial for me to stay up to date with whatever's happening about that, to understand how tariffs actually affect the business that my clients would do. Um, so stay up to date with the news, try and understand economics. If you're on the criminal side, I guess try and understand criminology and just like don't focus on just the law itself, or criminal psychology. So stuff like that. It's never just what we learn in law school that is what makes the profession. And there are a lot of other sides to it. And if you have a grasp on all of those, then you become a better lawyer and a more suitable candidate to be considered for an LLM.
Yeah. Well, I think those are beautiful sort of lessons and general stories to draw from. Would you have anything else a story you'd want to share? Any sort of experience that you think would be helpful to a future global cross-border young lawyer? Um, we'd be more than welcome to hear it.
Uh, I think we've covered most.
Okay.
I I don't think I have that much wisdom to shed at this point. Not yet. Maybe one day.
Mm.
Uh, but yeah, let me look through your questions again. Let's see if I missed anything. Mm. Oh, one thing that I could about the cross-cultural aspect. I think this is of particular interest to me as well. My master thesis was about cross-border slash intercultural negotiations. Um, Culture really has an impact on everything, obviously, but especially the legal profession. And in the international field, we all have different backgrounds, different ways to address and solve problems. Um, so it's important to be able to identify those differences. Um, Without obviously characterizing people or just like putting them into boxes, but seeing how this affects the way that they do work. So it's important to pay attention to those little things that will, um, in the end, I think that will make you a more valuable person, a more insightful person. And it will definitely affect the work that you do as well. I think that's one thing people um, miss in the way that they conduct cross-border um, deals or international relations. People tend to forget ways of expressing emotions, different ways of expressing ideas, and they come out in a different way that it was intended. Um, And I think it's a muscle that you build. You can't just one day decide that you want to know anything and everything that's going through that person's mind and how their culture and upbringing and education has formed that. You start one by one trying to notice that, and it takes a long time, and obviously it takes exposure to different cultures. So to the extent one is able to, it's important to have and to force yourself into that exposure.
I think that's a great note on culture to sort of end on. So thank you so much for participating in this interview. I really
No,
do
thank you
appreciate
for
your time.
asking.
Yeah, of course. And I will stop the recording if that's
Yep.